You're listening to Trek FM.
Welcome, listeners, to another episode from There to Here, Trek FM's anniversary rewatch, starting with Broken Bow, going all the way through Voyager and beyond. My name is Caitlin, and today we have another couple episodes of Voyager, end of season 6, to talk with Lee. Lee, how are you doing today?
Excellent. I feel that I never managed to do any of the Next Generation episodes on From There to Here, and now I'm on the Earl Grey podcast. It's quite a treat to actually discuss some sort of slightly Next Generation episodes. So yeah, I'm excited.
Oh yes, season 6 is the first season of Voyager that is solo, but it can feel like TNG 2.0 sometimes. So the first episode we have on the block today is Lifeline, and that is an episode featuring the emergency medical hologram, aka the Doctor. He gets a message from his creator, Louis Zimmerman, who is back in the Alpha Quadrant, that he is dying. So he makes a field trip to Jupiter Station to try to figure out what is going on with Dr. Zimmerman, who is rejecting all treatment and just wants to essentially die in peace, but the Doctor refuses to give up hope. He also enlists the help of Mr. Barclay and Deanna Troi to try to get Doc Zimmerman back on his feet. So Lee, what did you think of this episode?
Yeah, I think it's quite an interesting episode. It's the second part in the Troy Barclay series. I think it's a pretty interesting episode. I like the idea and a lot of the themes that this episode deals with. Like I'm trained in doing counselling, so I find this episode quite fascinating to view through that prism. I think it's quite fascinating to learn about the Doc Zimmerman's kind of the tragedy he feels about seeing his creation used to scrub ships and to do all these different things, and him coming to learn that what an amazing thing the Doc has managed to do. And I think there's some really interesting kind of character work at play here, and I think it's kind of a bit of a gem of an episode.
Yes, I would agree. I was looking on Wikipedia, and it's interesting to know that Pathfinder was aired in December of '99. So the showrunners took their time to kind of bring back Barclay and Troy, which is probably a good thing considering this is Voyager and those characters we know better from TNG. I think this episode is one where the Doctor can shine, and Robert Picardo is a fantastic actor. Any Star Trek episode that has a character playing two roles is definitely going to be a more of a technical challenge, but Picardo is able to pull off both roles very well, and at the heart of it, it feels like a father-son drama, and there are probably some scenes that are a little heavy or a little too heavy for, why is this family drama in my science fiction? But I think if you look at the 45 minutes as a whole, it does it well. So
yeah, and I love Robert Picardo. He's probably one of my favorite parts of Star Trek Voyager. So to see him kind of more of him, more grouchy Robert Picardo. Zimmerman reminds me almost of the Doc of season 1 and 2, that really grouchy,
exactly,
quite negative. And I felt, I think that was like an intentional decision. I think it was a really good decision to show the progress the Doctor's made, and then kind of where Doc Zimmerman's coming. You can almost see where the original Doctor kind of came from when he was activated. You could almost put the two of them together. One aspect, like, while I'm very praise heavy of this episode, as someone, as I was mentioning, I'm trained in counselling, and when Troy, and I know it's kind of done for laughs, when she goes, well, I just think you're both jerks, I really think that's, I know people probably think I'm being a bit negative here, but I think it portrays Troy is a pretty poor counselor, that she responds that way in a testing situation. To call both her kind of patients jerks, I think is, very ethically suspect. And while we always have this idea that Starfleet officers are the greatest, I think that's not the Troy of the next generation to act like that in a counselling setting. And I think that's maybe the writers weren't as kind of familiar with the character, or a bit worn out of kind of how to deal with it. I just think it's really disappointing to see her act like that and respond like that. And I know it all works out in the end, but I think it's pretty poor to show a professional dealing like that.
I think I know exactly what you mean. I don't think we saw enough of Troy counseling in TNG. I think she was kept on the bridge and assigned other duties more. I know in the novel verse, which you're not really following, but I know in Star Trek Titan, for instance, her first contact duties were played up, and she still was on the counseling team, but the ship has other counselors, so she's not the only one responsible for the well-being of the crew. I think by the end of TNG, they still didn't know exactly what to do with Troy, and it shows in this episode. But I also appreciate someone who can just not be involved in a situation, just come in and have a fresh set of eyes and just call it like it is. I don't mind the ethical question, gray area that you in your professional training can pinpoint. I think she's probably doing this as a favor to Reg Barclay anyway, more than a professional setting.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of a bit more kind of, you almost get the impression. Say I think more with like Barclay, they're kind of friends, so the lines between counselor and friend are a bit more blurred. I think when it comes to working with the doctors, these aren't people she knows, and I think her behaviour is quite, I know it's a TV show, and but like kind of making responses like that can do people a lot of long-term harm. It can almost give people the idea that counsellors maybe don't care about them, or it's, I know it's not like the most important thing in this episode. It's just a part that really struck out to me as kind of someone in that kind of professional realm as well. I think I would be kind of pulled over the coals if I had behaved like that, but it shouldn't detract from it. It's an enjoyable episode, and it's great to finally see at long last the Jupiter station, and the idea that the Voyager is getting closer to Earth in relative terms, and we're getting a bit more of these kind of bleeding in crossovers. It kind of shows the Star Trek universe being a bit bigger, and I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and this field trip for the Doctor isn't nearly as from far away as his first field trip from Message in a Bottle, because it seems like the crew is more willing to let him go to the Alpha Quadrant than, those sacrifices they were willing to make for Message in a Bottle, forgoing that, their only doctor just to make this contact. So I know what you mean. Like, they're getting closer, and the universe is starting to expand to fill in the gaps between the edges of the Alpha Quadrant and where Voyager is. So, do you have anything else that you want to say about Lifeline?
No, I think I'm well kind of sussed there. One little thing is, I thought it was odd that Starfleet has deep space ships that are only 3 years away from Voyager. That seems a bit odd, but hey, I just kind of get that. I don't really get how they're so deep that they're only 3 years away from Voyager, which is like 60 years away from Earth. Yeah, that seemed a bit of a throwaway line, but I'm kind of curious about how that all works and what ships those are and why they're so far out.
Yeah, Voyager never got into the Gamma Quadrant or the War of the Dominion, so who knows what's going on, in between where Voyager is and Earth. I kind of almost liked watching Voyager in a bubble without being aware of what was going on in Deep Space Nine. So now that I do know, it's going to be like, how does the expanded universe affect Voyager? And we don't really see that except for glimpses. And sometimes lines are thrown out that either make the hair on the back of your neck stand up professionally or just confuse you, like wait, they're that close to Voyager? What? And it's just like, you know, at the end of the day, it's like not all the lines can be thoroughly well written. Just have to take it as a whole.
Exactly.
So our second episode for this block is The Haunting of Deck 12, aka Voyager's Ghost Story. Voyager has to go into power save mode as they enter a nebula, and 7 of 9 is worried about how the disruption in their regeneration will affect the Borg children. So she asks Neelix to entertain them and distract them. But the Borg children's curiosity gets the better of them, and Neelix tells them a ghost story of what happened to Voyager to cause them to be in this situation. A sentient being picked up from a nebula wreaks havoc in the computer system until Voyager realizes what's going on, and they race to find another nebula that the creature can live in. So, Lee, what did you think of the ghost story?
Not really pretty excited about it, to be honest. I think when it kind of in a larger scheme, people kind of talk down the Wesley episodes, when Star Trek deals with young kids, whether it's when the bow breaks or, for example, give me those episodes over the Borg kids any day. Like, I think this is the second or third Borg episode with the kids. There was it Child's Play, Collective, and now this one. I really do not like the Borg kids. I find them, you know, almost each episode totally forgettable and such bland characters, and to have a whole episode where it's almost devoted to them, really just like, oh no, this is a bit of a slog to get through. You know, I must say I love Neelix. I have no issues with Neelix. Love's a strong word, but I really like Neelix. People talk him down as a character. Oh, he's an idiot. He's this and that. He's a perfectly fine character. He has moments where he's a bit silly or a bit stupid, but I think overall he's a largely inoffensive character. You get some good moments, there's some good depth to him, and you know, I can't remember what episode I said it on. It's been such a long journey of getting from there to here on my blocks, and I think that there's always a darkness underneath Neelix, that he has gone through something so horrific, kind of, you know, growing up with the disaster that was on Talax. And I always think of him that when he's helping with young kids, that he's almost kind of trying to give back what was maybe taken away from him, and sometimes explains his jovial attitude that hides a darkness. So I like a Neelix episode. This is just one that's not overly exciting. It's a kind of spam in the can episode. They've got saving the money for the big finale. So yeah, it's not an episode I have much feeling on either way. It's just, it is what it is, and it's just a Borg kid episode again, and yay.
See, I have a soft spot for this episode. This is one of my comfort food episodes, and I don't see it as the Borg children featuring in this episode. They're kind of like off to the side learning about the story as it's happening. I think this is actually a really well done story, because you have the present timeline where Neelix is telling the ghost story, and then you see the action happening. Janeway is one of my other favorite characters behind B'Elanna, and I just really like watching Kate Mulgrew chew scenery as she fights with the computer gone haywire. So I don't have as much of a lukewarm reaction to this episode as you do, but it's not near as high as Muse in terms of my favorites. This is just an episode that I can pop in and enjoy, have a good time watching. I think when I watched it for the first time, the Borg children didn't really bother me. In the end, it feels like it's just Icheb who's giving Neelix a hard time and being really technical. The other three children do kind of just fade into the background. So I was able to almost ignore them and focus on the ghost story as it was actually unfolding, which I thought was pretty effective storytelling.
Yeah, as I say, it was just something that just didn't strike me that. I think season 6 is a pretty up and down season, and I think the highs of something like Muse, for example, really stand out. And then there's episodes, for example, which I think season 6, like Ashes to Ashes, is an episode I really detest. And something like The Haunting of Deck 12 just falls in the middle. It's not one that I remember fondly, or it's not one that provokes a reaction where I can almost describe why I dislike it and make an impassioned defense. This is just one of the many episodes you get over 729 episodes where it's not bad, it's not great, it's just something that's there, and that's okay sometimes.
Yeah, it's funny watching these shows with hindsight. After I got into Star Trek, I got into Doctor Who. Doctor Who has fewer episodes than Voyager, at least by half, if not more, depending on the series. And so it feels like there are some episodes of Star Trek where, okay, the writers definitely had a deadline. They needed to get a story in, by this day. And sometimes the edges aren't completely filed down. You see the rough spots that they hadn't had time to smooth out. And maybe The Haunting of Deck 12 is an example where it's near the end of the season. They already have the finale plotted out. They just need one more episode, and an interesting idea comes to them, but they don't have enough time to really flesh it out. So they tack on the A plot of Neelix telling the story to the kids, and mixed results are the end result.
Yeah, and I think it's one of these things that we kind of think of, say, Doctor Who there, as you bring up. British TV, it's either between 6 and 12 episodes for a series. This was the kind of the 90s, the early noughties, where they've got 26 episode seasons, and it's so hard to keep up any form of consistency over a season. Your season 6 of Deep Space Nines, your season 4 of Voyagers, season 3 of TNG, where the ratio is so really, really high. They're still clunkers, and by this point in Voyager's history, it's nearly the 150 odd episode mark. It's 26 season episodes. As you say, by this time of the season, they've done so many episodes, and Haunting of Deck 12, a money saving episode. That's just what it is, and that's okay.
Yeah, and some people like me can view it as comfort viewing. Maybe listeners can get onto the Babel conference and let us know what episodes they like as comfort food. If Haunting of Deck 12 whets their appetite. Lee, where can we find you on the good old internet?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Lee_Nostromo. You can find me at Star Trek VHS, my Twitter account dedicated to the art of Star Trek VHS covers. You can find me on the Filibuster podcast on the Nerd Party Network, talking about geek culture. And you can find me on Trek FM on the Earl Grey podcast. What about yourself, Caitlin?
You can find me in the Babel conference, and I'm also on Twitter at Walsh Caitlin. That's all one word, and it's my last name, first name. And if you like my podcasting, I can be heard on Star Trek Romulans Bearing Gifts. So until tomorrow, listeners, live long and prosper.